Hello. Today we're going to talk about um, how the world starts to kind of split up between this idea of democracy and communism post World War II. We've already talked a little bit about like different ideologies between the Soviet Union and the United States. Today we'll then look at like bigger picture how like politically who starts to align with who starts to become like BFFs with who, and then how that leads us into the Cold War big picture. Let's get into it. So Berlin Airlift, if you remember that really atrocious drawing that I did, right? Germany is split in half. We have the democratic side, we have the communist side, and then within the communist side is the city of Berlin, which is the capital. So within Berlin, then you split it in half. Okay, so Berlin gets split in half. Um, we they build the Berlin Wall to make sure that communism doesn't go here and to make sure that democracy doesn't go there, um, as a like a visual representation of we don't like each other. So the Soviet Union is in charge of the communist side of Germany, which means they're in charge of the side where Berlin is. So they really don't like democracy, and they're like, well, if we just block off Berlin from everybody, then it'll eventually fall to communism. The Democratic side had been like sending supplies to the western half of Berlin because the western half of Berlin is also democratic. So they've been sending supplies, they've been sending food, water, clothes, stuff like that. And then what the Soviet Union does is they like build then an additional wall around western Berlin so that there's no way to get into Berlin. You can't get in, you can't drive, you can't walk, you can't take a train. There's no way to get into western Berlin, and their thought process is that if like if they hold Berlin hostage long enough, then the democratic side will be like, okay, that's fine, like we give up. Germany can be a communist country. Is there hope? The United States, England, and France, though, are very stubborn and they don't want to just let Berlin fall to France. So they do this thing called the Berlin Airlift. So for 11 months, um, almost constantly, planes would fly in. They would fly into West Berlin. They would land just long enough to like shove a bunch of supplies out of the back of the plane and then take off again. They knew that planes were going to be relatively safe because they knew that the Soviet Union wasn't going to shoot down any of the planes. Because if they shot down, you know, an American plane, then that would be a declaration of war, and we just fought a war, and we don't want to do that. So they're like, we'll just fly supplies in, we'll land just long enough to shove some supplies out, and then we'll take off again. Side democracy still gets supplies, nobody is getting shot down, it's a win-win. The Soviet Union then, after 11 months, is like, fine, you guys are stubborn. We'll take this little outer wall down. You can start sending supplies to Western Berlin normally, and we'll just keep our half over here. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's the Berlin airlift. That was kind of the proof that it's a Cold War, right? Soviet Union didn't like the fact that we were sending airplanes in, but they didn't want to shoot the airplane down because if they did that, then we would be fighting another war, which nobody wants to do. Okay. Something the alliances that happen. Remember alliances? Alliances friend group, right? The people that you hang out with, the people that you have things in common with that are going to protect you if needed. Our first is called NATO. It's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Excuse me, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and basically it's the United States and Canada. There are other countries that are like kind of a part of it, um, but we're the two countries that are like the biggest supporters of it, right? Also, it's called North Atlantic. Or sorry, these countries um, are on the North Atlantic Ocean, so that's why it's called that. But it's the U.S. and Canada, and we get together and we're like, hey, economically we're set, we're safe, politically we're safe, like we're just cruising. Let's become a team so that if for some reason the Soviet Union tries to attack us, we have this military alliance. We'll protect each other. If the Soviet Union tries to fight Canada, the U.S. will support it. If they try to fight the U.S., Canadians will support us. So it's a military alliance, it's a military treaty. The second then is the Warsaw Pact. So this one is about democracy. The second then is the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact is communism, all the communist countries, so the Soviet Union, which used to be Russia. So the Soviet Union, Eastern Germany, right, because the Soviet Union is in charge of that, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. Poland is the country that both the Soviet Union and Germany fought over in World War II. It has become a communist country because the Soviet Union basically said, hey, become a communist country or we'll take you over again. So Poland said, sure. So they fall to communism. They get together as a military alliance and say, hey, if anybody tries to attack us, we'll support each other. They're the ones who build the Berlin Wall, splitting Eastern Berlin, which is communist, and Western Berlin, which is side with democracy. Okay, Berlin Wall is just through the city of Berlin. It's not through the entirety of Germany. There are like barricades through what Eastern and Western Germany, but the wall itself is in just the city of Berlin. Okay, those are our two alliances. So Cold War. Okay, the Cold War was threaten to destroy each other. We never actually do. Remember, we don't actually fight the Soviet Union, but both countries are constantly changing their technology and increasing the technology. We get the hydrogen bomb, which is stronger than the atomic bomb, which is what we dropped on Japan at the end of World War II. That was Japan, I promise. So we get stronger bombs. We also create things called ICBMs, which are intercontinental ballistic missiles, which can go for like 3,000 miles. You just push fly and then it takes off and it goes and it just blows things up. We had never been able to have missiles that could go that far, but because of science, we're able to. But we don't use them. We just say, hey, we can use them if we need to, which is this idea of brinkmanship. You ever heard the phrase like you're on the brink of war or you're on the brink of a great discovery? Being on the brink of it means that you're right on the edge of whatever. You're right on the edge of war. You're right on the edge of a new idea. So brinkmanship is this idea that we can go to war if we wanted to, right? Both the United States and the Soviet Union, like think of like a war movie, right? There's always the red button that's going to launch all of the missiles. Both the United States and the Soviet Union, we have that red button, and both leaders are like, I can push it if I want to. I don't want to, but I could. I could blow you up. I'm not gonna, but I could. And it's just this constant, like, we have the technology to be at war. We don't use the technology, but we have it if we wanted to use it. Which again goes back to this idea of like threatening, and the Cold War really is about like who has more weapons, who has more science, who has more technology, and it becomes an arms race. Not meaning that we like are all doing handstands and running around on our arms, but arms race in terms of weapons. Okay, constantly trying to outdo each other, constantly trying to outgrow each other in terms of weapons. And then Sputnik. Sputnik is an unmanned satellite, it's an unmanned spaceship that the Soviet Union sends to space. And America starts to panic because they're like, well, crap. Yeah, we have like the hydrogen bomb and we have a bunch of like missiles that we can send to the Soviet Union, but they just went to space. And we start to panic because we're like, well, if the Soviet Union can go to space, that means they can like bomb us from space. And we have zero idea how to combat that. Like, we don't know how to protect ourselves from a space attack. So we start to fear that we're falling behind. And if we fall behind, then, we might lose because we can't protect ourselves. So this is like late 50s, early 60s, which is really when we start to like amp up NASA and the space program. Okay. There's then a second one called Sputnik 2. They're not very creative with their names. Okay, and then briefly about China. China becomes a communist country. It was already a communist country at the end of World War II. We talked about it briefly already a couple weeks ago. Well, I guess now like a couple months ago. But Mao Zedong takes over. There's a lot of like animosity between the rich people and the poor people, and Mao Zedong is like, well, we should just have the poor people like overthrow the government, and then everything will be fine. And the peasants are like, okay. So they do. They have kind of like a little civil war in China. Not as intense as the United States Civil War, but still a political civil war over if they want to have communism or if they want to have their like traditional way of leadership. They go with communism. Mao Zedong takes over. He calls it the People's Republic of China. Republic is like a kind of like a democracy. So the United States is a little bit like, we're not really going to worry about it. They say they're a republic, so that means that the people have some sort of say in what's going on, which in theory is true. In actuality, not so much. But we don't really worry about China initially until the Soviet Union starts to help them. So this is China. This is the Soviet Union. Okay, so they're neighbors. The Soviet Union starts to hand a bunch of like weapons, a bunch of money, a bunch of technology, a bunch of scientists. They give it to China as a like, hey, you should start to also build up your weapon system, so that if needed, China could help the Soviet Union fight the United States. So when that starts happening, we kind of start to worry. This is all then precursor to both Korea and Vietnam. Korea is right here, Vietnam is here. I'm not an artist. But we start to worry that communism is going to seep down into these countries. And remember, the whole purpose of the Cold War is mint. Okay. So China falls to communism, but they call it a republic. So we don't totally worry about it just yet. Okay. And I will upload this video. It's a really interesting video about all of the atomic bombs that have ever been dropped in the world. And yep, that's it. Okay, short and sweet today. Just remember this is the idea of an arms race, right? Constantly trying to outdo each other in terms of technology, not trying to like defeat the other person, just trying to make ourselves seem cooler and smarter and more awesome than everybody else. And we're on the brink of war, but we don't actually ever fight a war. Okay, that's that. If you have any questions, let me know, and I will talk to you soon.